reason why I want to interview you is because when we were talking in Dr. Hill's class, there was a lot of comparison to your class and hers, and I thought, wow, I'm thinking being a part time that I'm missing out a little bit. So I want to definitely get a chance to meet you, and I know that I'll make up that class. I think we're over the summer or sometime on in the program, so I'm definitely gonna get to bug you a little bit longer.
By the way, question number one, I thought was kind of good in that the answer is really right in front of you. Like, what do you consider to be the top two or three foundational disciplines?
Mhm.
Well, we actually renamed ourselves Learning, Design, and Technology because those are the disciplines, you might say. Like, as you pointed out in your question, like educational psychology or learning and cognition that's the learning part, which I would also add motivation with that.
That's
In
true.
fact, I would actually say motivation has become a bit more important in our field of understanding it. Design, again, design thinking, there's all the design fields. And of course, instructional design is sort of what we're known for, but I tend to be more global than that. I like instructional design, but I know sometimes this idea of just instruction is not the way to go. I like to find other routes to learning other than just teaching in the instructional sense. Teaching can be certainly let's explore, let's discover. So the word teaching is one I like more than instruction. And then technology, like I say, being able to use technology to support learning through our design. So those I think those to me are the foundational areas.
What kind of advice would you give me as far as where to begin and maybe cautions, I guess?
Yeah. Well, one thing of your questions that I really was making a lot of notes. You made me think. So I think the one that triggers is it says, how do you take theories into practice, the application of theory?
Yeah.
And I've long been somewhat of the odd man out or the odd person out in that I don't like putting theory first. So much of our field over the years has been like the first question is, what's your theory? And then they come up with a question. And I've always thought, I want to see something that is happening that really makes me curious. Like, ooh, that was really interesting. So when I was in the classroom, I was a fifth grade teacher for a few years. Sometimes things would work, sometimes they didn't. And it really makes you question, like, well, why did that work? Like I really had the kids in the palm of my hand there. They were really with me. And other times, it's just trying to herd cats and you're just pulling your hair out. And I think in our world of design, when we design something, it doesn't have to be a thing, it doesn't have to be software, it could be a strategy or some kind of an activity that I just talk about with a group of people, that when it works, it's like, well, what happened here? So I like to start there with either, it could be either way. It did work or it didn't work. And I'm really curious why. Like I really thought it was going to be a fantastic idea and it kind of fell flat. And then, to kind of build on that. And if you really get invested in some things, for example, early in my research, this is well before computer graphics were what they are today. We're back with pixelated blocks and things that are moving on the screen barely.
The Oregon Trail, right?
Well, that's right. Very good. You might have been of that age when that came about.
The Apple IIe's in second grade. Yep.
Well, I was designing for the Apple IIe's, and hopefully you did not die of dysentery as you got
Couple
probably
times.
did. And you're probably into hunting. That was the thing. Everybody wanted to hunt, Circle the wagons, we have Native Americans. They might help you, but no, we have to circle the wagons.
That's right.
So interesting critique of Oregon Trail. But I was interested in things like some very elementary physics, like laws of motion and things like that. And so animation obviously would be a great way to understand that. And so I just reading books, and I was in engineering for just a short time. And the static graphics, even though they were showing pictures with arrows pointing different ways, and the arrows was some were bigger, some were smaller. Why not animate that, you know? And so I started off more as, you know, why can't I make something better and in terms of teaching? And then I developed some things and they seemed to be working. And then I was more curious about the theory. So this is a long answer to the question of really start where your one where your passion is and where you really have a question you want to answer. I've seen a lot of doctoral students start with a theory, and you know they're not into it. It's the latest thing. Everyone seems to be doing it, and they think they need to as well. And you can kind of tell they're bored. You know, they're going to go through the steps, or what, you know, just going to go through the paces, and that's not good. You know, so start again. Start there. I think, and a lot of good science. If you think history of science, usually started with somebody saying, "Wow, what was that all about?" or a question that they had. So that'd be one bit of advice. The second thing is, and this goes back to trends of the field, we tend to be very much doing research in what is happening in technology. So right now, you're going to see a lot of stuff in AI in the next year. It's going to be huge. And there's a pro and con to this. One, it's good that we have people, that there are people in the field who are going to be starting to do research on what's innovative right now, what's really happening and what's emerging. And if your interest is there, great. I mean, all the better. But just kind of be careful you don't jump onto a bandwagon because you think that's what everyone else is doing. So but you can see this with social media was a big one for a while. Interestingly, I was into gaming before gaming was popular. And I remember actually being a little worried that people would not take me seriously because I'm writing about games. And now, of course, in the last 10 years or so, it's been huge. So again, kind of watch out for the fads, I guess would be the other thing. It's interesting. I kind of go like a pendulum. Sometimes I will be very much following one or two people very, very closely, what they're reading. When I go to a conference, I see if they're presenting. And then sometimes I swing back and I'm just like, well, let me just open the door or the windows widely and just see what kind of hits me. And I'm kind of in that open the door, open the window mode right now. But interestingly, I've been actually reading articles that my faculty have been reading. I asked them for examples of their own work, and so I've been reading some of the work that they shared with me. So that's my answer. I think right now I'm actually following my own faculty, and sometimes it's ironic. One doesn't know what the person next door to you is doing nearly as well as somebody else that might be, you know, half a world away. So, and they're just doing a variety of really interesting things. You know, for example, Dr. Kopch is doing some interesting work with embodied cognition, actually having the whole body be involved, not just sitting there listening or doing something with one's hands, but the full body, but also doing the paper I actually read of his was something related to artificial intelligence, which I found really interesting, and came across something called a confusion matrix, which I think is a metaphor for life in many ways. I read a paper by our Elisha Ding recently. She's doing a lot of interesting work with VR and gaming. Found that really interesting. We have a new faculty, Matthew Schmidt, who did some, well, the paper I read was a very interesting paper working with adults with autism at different points on the spectrum, and how to use VR to help them with, you know, how to ride a bus, you know, how to be safe on the streets and things like that. So just this really nice diversity of really important ideas that, you know, it was just really kind of nice. So that's where I'm at. And I did come up with some, I'm going to send you an email when we're done talking. I came up with some examples of articles that you might find interesting if you want to read them. I'm not going to quiz you later to say, well, what did you think about that one? And these are not necessarily like the most famous articles. These are kind of ones that people have sort of resonated with when I've had them read them. And I'm going to throw one in there. That's one well, actually two that I wrote, but one that might be really interesting that I co-wrote with one of my former students is about accessibility and instructional technology. But our subtitle is reframing the discussion, because we think about accessibility as being with 503C compliance and all that. And we took it more in terms of removing barriers to learning.
Right.
And I think you would resonate with it a bit, because I think with your personal statement, you're doing the same thing, really thinking about accessibility, about opportunities,
Right.
and making good decisions and making the most of those opportunities. And I think that's a very powerful thing. So that's but there's another. I'm into this thing now called Q methodology. I've just come across in the last few years. So I on my email will say extra, just that it's something I'm into now, but it's sort of not part of the conversation too much.
And what is that again? Q
It's called Q, just the letter Q methodology.
methodology. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, I thought maybe where you were going at first was the fact that you might be asking sensitive questions, and that IRB would be, um,
Yeah.
perhaps asking a lot of questions in return. And I've not done any kind of research that is invasive or asking a lot about maybe some personal histories that, based on what you had said in your one statement. I know you've worked with people who, they've fallen into some real traps and couldn't get out. And so if some of your interest is in trying to understand that better, that's, I would say, find someone who has some advice to offer, and it's not going to be me. I think IRB, of course, they are more than happy to talk with researchers ahead of time, and so they are approachable. And I think that might be the best advice, is to, get a meeting with them, get to know some of the people over there, and try to sort out what is and is not, going to be raising red flags. But it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, I think it should not be a showstopper by any means. I think the other direction you were going with that is, it's really big. It's this huge thing. And this is a typical, I want to say problem. It's actually a good thing. There's a lot of things to be thinking about for what could be researched. My big advice always to people has been, do something. Usually some people get paralyzed pretty quickly, and they might be saying, well, I'm not ready yet. I haven't had that course. I don't know how to interview yet. I don't know how to do that. I don't know statistics. And yeah, you'll pick it up as you go. But the best thing is to, begin. So if there is a questionnaire that you can get approved through IRB, that a starting point is to just talk with people and to get a sense of what questions are resonating, and you get responses versus questions that people pull back from. I mean, it's hard to know what exactly any idea you have will actually happen, what will happen with it, until you try it out. And whether it's, if I'm designing a computer game or something, I can't wait till the whole thing is done before I show it to the first person, because it might be at that point I got so much invested that how dare they not like what I just did. So this idea of the design process of prototyping and iteration, where you start small and you keep improving as you go, that to me, you'll be hearing that a lot from me if you have any opportunities to take a class with me. But and that's, you'll see too in the research game, it's all about this chain of reasoning. So, you start with a study and you'll come up with some answers, but usually you come up with more questions and you build, so it goes on and on and on. And a lot of careers are built on starting with very simple, straightforward questions that sort of mushroom and go in different directions and so forth. So start somewhere. Don't be paralyzed. Well, I remember having similar thoughts of, research is this mystery or has a lot of mystique associated with it. But the more I've done it, it always gets reduced more and more to, as I said earlier, what is the fundamental question you're asking, and what data do you need to try to answer it? And sometimes it really is as simple as a list of questions that begins a conversation, much like what we're doing now, where you got me thinking about a few questions, but now that we're having a conversation, not just what's your answer to number two, what's your answer to number three. But research very much begins this kind of way, and it can be real research by what we're doing, right now. So there's so much qualitative research that's built on interview. Lots of other techniques too. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to learn, and there's some really great things that you will get, but it can be pretty simple at the same time. We used to be all into experimental designs, and we'd have random controls, and we don't tend to do that much anymore. So it's much more, well, in fact, it's called design-based research, which is something you'll be learning quite a bit about. But it's very similar to what I've already told you, where you start with something that seems to be working or not. You ask the question why, then you tweak it, and it either works better or worse, or no different. And you try to, especially if it works a little better, well, why? Come up with a little, they call it humble theories. Well, how can I explain that to myself? And then maybe you can connect that to a larger, established theory. But it is this little iteration, but always with an eye toward, like, well, let me try to explain this. What's my theory? So that's more, I think, in keeping with our field is doing. We're not, again, doing the big randomized control trials that sometimes you hear about.